The champagne was Dom Perignon. The roses were imported from Ecuador. The wedding cake had cost $12,000 and taken 3 months to design. My daughter's wedding was, by every measurable standard, perfect. And I was paying for all of it.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
I sat at the head table in my cream-colored Chanel suit, the one I had bought specifically for this occasion, and I watched my daughter Victoria laugh with her new husband. She looked radiant in her Vera Wang gown, her dark hair swept up in an elegant chignon, her smile bright enough to light the entire ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton. She hadn't smiled at me like that in 15 years. "Ladies and gentlemen," the best man announced, tapping his glass with a silver knife. "It's time for the toast from the mother of the bride." I felt the eyes of 300 guests turn toward me. The cream of Boston society, Victoria's carefully curated guest list of investment bankers, tech executives, and old money families. People who mattered, people who could help her husband's career. I had not been consulted on the guest list. I had only been consulted on the budget. I rose from my chair, smoothing the front of my jacket, and picked up my champagne flute. My hand was steady. I had practiced this moment in front of my mirror for weeks, rehearsing the perfect words, the perfect smile, the perfect performance of maternal pride. But as I opened my mouth to speak, Victoria stood up. "Wait," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "Before my mother gives her little speech, I have something to say." I froze, champagne glass suspended in midair. This wasn't part of the program. This wasn't part of anything we had discussed. Victoria turned to face me, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Something cold and calculated. Something she had inherited from her father. My late husband Richard, who had been dead for 8 years, but whose cruelty lived on in the daughter he had raised to despise me. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," Victoria said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "And I want to especially thank my mother for writing the checks. That's what she's good at, after all. Writing checks and staying out of the way." A nervous ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others leaned forward, sensing drama, hungry for it. "But I think it's time everyone knew the truth about Eleanor Marsh." Victoria's smile sharpened. "The truth is that she was never really a mother to me. She was always too busy with her charity boards and her social climbing to actually be there. My father raised me. My father loved me. And when he died, she couldn't wait to erase every trace of him from our lives. I stood perfectly still. I did not cry. I had stopped crying over Victoria's cruelty years ago. So before she gives some rehearsed speech about how proud she is of me, I want everyone to know—" Victoria's voice rose, theatrical and triumphant. "I wish you weren't my mother. You're nothing to me. You never were, and you never will be." The ballroom went silent. 300 people held their breath. Somewhere in the back, a waiter dropped a tray of glasses, the crash cutting through the stillness like a gunshot. Victoria stood there, flushed with the pleasure of her public execution, waiting for me to crumble. Waiting for me to cry, or flee, or beg for her forgiveness as I had done so many times before. I did none of those things. Instead, I reached into my purse, the vintage Hermes Kelly bag that had belonged to my mother, and pulled out a yellowed envelope. It was old, the paper soft with age, the edges worn from being handled and examined and put away again, year after year, for 3 decades. I walked toward Victoria, my heels clicking against the marble floor in the absolute silence. I stopped in front of her, and I placed the envelope on her plate, right next to her untouched slice of $12,000 wedding cake. "Your wish," I said, my voice clear and calm, "was granted 30 years ago." Victoria's smile vanished. "What is this?" She picked up the envelope, turning it over in her hands. "What the hell is this? Open it." Her husband Derek leaned over, trying to see. The guests closest to the head table craned their necks. Victoria's maid of honor, her best friend Bethany, who had been part of every scheme to humiliate me for the past decade, stood frozen with her champagne glass halfway to her lips. Victoria tore open the envelope and pulled out the document inside. It was a single page, yellowed with age, official seals and signatures faded but still legible. I watched her face as she read it, I watched the color drain from her cheeks. I watched her hands begin to tremble. "This isn't real," she whispered. "This can't be real." "It's very real. I've kept it for 30 years waiting for the right moment." I picked up my champagne glass and took a sip. The Dom Perignon was excellent. "You were 3 days old when I found you on the steps of St. Catherine's Church. Abandoned, unwanted, left to die in a cardboard box with nothing but a thin blanket and a note that said, 'I can't keep her.'" Victoria's face had gone white. The document, her original birth certificate, listing her mother as unknown and her father as unknown, trembled in her grip. "I adopted you legally. I raised you. I loved you, even when you made it impossible." I set down my glass. "But you're right about one thing, Victoria. I'm not your mother. I never was. I was just the woman who saved your life." The ballroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, the scraping of chairs as people leaned toward their neighbors. Someone was filming on their phone. Someone else was already texting, spreading the news to everyone who wasn't there to witness it in person. Victoria stood frozen, the birth certificate clutched in her hands, her perfect wedding in ruins around her. "You're lying," she said. But her voice had lost its power. "This is some kind of trick. Daddy would have told me. Your daddy knew from the beginning. He never wanted to adopt you. He said it would be inconvenient, that it would complicate the family line." I smiled, and for the first time in years it was genuine. "I begged him to let me keep you. I promised I would handle everything, the paperwork, the explanations, the money, and I did. For 30 years I handled everything." Derek, Victoria's new husband, was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. I noticed that he had moved slightly away from her, creating distance between them. "Interesting." "This changes nothing," Victoria hissed. "You're still nothing to me. Blood or not, you're still the same weak, pathetic—" "I'm not finished." I reached into my purse again and pulled out a second envelope, this one newer, crisper, with the letterhead of Sullivan and Associates, the most prestigious estate law firm in Massachusetts. "This is the documentation for the Eleanor Marsh Family Trust, established 18 months ago. All of my assets, the house on Beacon Hill, the property in the Hamptons, the investment portfolio, the art collection, everything, have been transferred to this irrevocable trust." Victoria grabbed the envelope, tearing it open. Her eyes scanned the pages, growing wider with each line she read. "The beneficiaries are your children, Victoria, Charlotte and William. They will receive everything when they turn 25. I paused, letting the words sink in. "You are not a beneficiary. You will receive nothing. Not now, not ever." "You can't do this," Victoria snarled. "I'll contest it. I'll have you declared incompetent. Derek's father is a judge. Derek's father is a family court judge in Connecticut. He has no jurisdiction over a trust established in Massachusetts and administered by a New York trustee. I've had 18 months to make this bulletproof, Victoria. Do you really think I didn't plan for every contingency?" Victoria turned to Derek, desperate. "Tell her she can't do this. Tell her!" But Derek was looking at his new wife with something that might have been disgust, or might have been fear, or might have been the dawning realization that he had just married a woman who had nothing to offer him except debt and drama. "Victoria," he said carefully, "maybe we should discuss this in private." "There's nothing to discuss." Victoria's voice had risen to a shriek. "She's trying to destroy me. She's always hated me. "I never hated you," I said quietly, and somehow my voice cut through her hysteria. "I loved you more than you will ever understand. But love doesn't mean letting someone destroy you, and it doesn't mean rewarding cruelty with inheritance." I picked up my purse and walked away from the head table, toward the ballroom doors. The crowd parted before me like the Red Sea, 300 faces staring in shock and fascination, and something that might have been respect. At the door, I turned back. "Enjoy your wedding, Victoria. I paid for it. Consider it my final gift." And then I walked out into the Boston evening, leaving behind the ruins of my daughter's perfect day and the beginning of my own liberation. The valet brought my car, a silver Mercedes that Victoria had always coveted but that I had refused to give her. As I drove away from the Ritz-Carlton, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: freedom. The game I had been playing for 30 years was finally over, and I had won. The planning had begun 5 years before the wedding, on a cold December evening when I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. I had come home early from a charity board meeting, one of my meaningless social climbing events, as Victoria called them, because I wasn't feeling well. The flu had been going around, and I had decided that rest was more important than the final vote on the children's hospital expansion. Victoria and Derek were in the study. They had been dating for 3 years at that point, and Derek had become a fixture in my home. Always polite to my face, always watching me with calculating eyes that reminded me too much of my late husband. I was walking past the study door, which was slightly ajar, when I heard my name. "Eleanor won't live forever," Victoria was saying. "She's 63. Her mother died at 68, her father at 70. We just need to be patient." "Patient?" Derek's voice was skeptical. "We've been patient for 3 years. Your inheritance isn't going to materialize out of thin air. It will when she dies. Everything comes to me. The house, the investments, the art collection. It has to. I'm her only child." I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding. But what if she decides to leave it to charity? She's on all those boards. She cares more about those orphans and cancer patients than she does about you. She won't. She can't. She feels too guilty about being such a terrible mother. Victoria laughed, a sound I had once found beautiful but now recognized as cruel. "Every time I remind her of how she failed me, she gives me more money. It's like training a dog." I felt the words like a physical blow. Training a dog. That's what I was to her. But waiting for her to die could take 20 years, Derek said. "I don't want to wait 20 years. We won't have to. I've been talking to Dr. Feldman, my father's old friend from the country club. He's a psychiatrist. He says that with the right documentation, we could have her declared mentally incompetent within 6 months." My blood ran cold. Incompetent? On what grounds? Memory loss, confusion, paranoia. It's not hard to manufacture, especially in a woman her age. A few concerned statements from her daughter, some documented instances of erratic behavior, a petition to the court. Victoria's voice was casual, as if she were discussing dinner plans. "Once she's declared incompetent, I become her legal guardian. I control everything." That's actually brilliant. I know. I've been planning it for months. The key is to make her doubt herself first. If she thinks she's losing her mind, she won't fight back when we make our move. I stood there in the hallway, frozen, listening to my daughter plan to steal my life. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes, maybe. Hours. Long enough for Victoria and Derek to finish their conversation and leave through the back door, heading to some dinner party I hadn't been invited to. When I finally moved, my legs were shaking. I went to my bedroom, the master suite that I had shared with Richard until his death, the room Victoria had been trying to convince me to give her for years. And I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought. I thought about my husband, who had married me for my family's money and spent 30 years making me feel worthless, who had turned our daughter against me from the moment she was born, whispering poison in her ear, telling her that Mommy was weak, Mommy was stupid, Mommy wasn't really her real mother anyway. I thought about the day I had found Victoria on those church steps. She had been so small, so fragile, wrapped in a threadbare blanket that couldn't possibly have kept her warm in the January cold. I had fallen in love with her instantly, completely, irrevocably. And I thought about how she had repaid that love, the cruelty that had started in childhood and only grown worse over time, the public humiliations, the private manipulations, the way she had convinced everyone, that I was the villain in our story. I had spent 63 years being underestimated by my parents, who had wanted a son, by my husband, who had wanted my money but not my opinions, by my daughter, who had wanted my inheritance but not my love. Maybe it was time to stop being underestimated. The next morning, I called Harrison Sullivan, the best estate attorney in Boston. He had been my father's lawyer, and his father had been my grandfather's lawyer before that. He was 78 years old, sharp as a razor, and absolutely discreet. "Eleanor," he said when I walked into his office. "You look like a woman with a plan." "I need to protect my assets," I said. "From everyone, including my daughter." Harrison didn't blink. He had known Victoria since she was a child. He had watched her grow into the woman she had become. "Tell me everything," he said, and I did. Over the next 18 months, Harrison and I constructed the most comprehensive asset protection strategy he had ever designed. We created the irrevocable trust, carefully structured to be untouchable by Victoria, or any court she might petition. We transferred properties, restructured investments, established charitable foundations that would continue my legacy long after I was gone, but that was only the financial component. The personal component required a different kind of preparation. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Webb. He was 55 years old, a former FBI agent, and utterly ruthless in his pursuit of information. I gave him one instruction: find everything there is to find about Victoria, Derek, and their plans. What he found was worse than I had imagined. Victoria and Derek had already begun the process of having me declared incompetent. They had met with 3 different psychiatrists, shopping for one who would provide the diagnosis they needed. They had created a folder of evidence, forged documents, fabricated incidents, statements from people who had been paid to lie about my mental state. They had also been systematically poisoning my relationships. Victoria had told my friends that I was becoming paranoid, that I had accused her of stealing from me, that I had threatened to harm myself. She had told my charity board colleagues that I was showing signs of dementia, that they should be prepared for me to step down. Every kind word, every concerned phone call, every "I'm just worried about you, Mother," all of it had been part of the plan. Marcus also discovered something else. Something that changed everything. Derek wasn't just an ambitious young man who wanted to marry into money. Derek was drowning in debt. His family's Connecticut fortune had been gone for years, squandered by his father's gambling addiction and his mother's shopping habits. Derek needed Victoria's inheritance to save himself from bankruptcy, and Victoria knew. She had chosen him specifically because he was desperate enough to help her steal from me, and controllable enough to do whatever she asked. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked me after his final report. I looked at the folder in my hands. Hundreds of pages of evidence, recordings of conversations, photographs of meetings with corrupt psychiatrists, financial records showing the depth of Derek's desperation. "I want to wait," I said. "Wait? They're planning to have you committed within the year." "I know, but I'm not ready yet. The trust isn't fully funded, and there are some pieces still missing." I closed the folder. "Besides, I want them to think they're winning. I want them to get comfortable, careless." Marcus studied me with something like admiration. "You're playing a long game." "I've been playing a long game for 63 years. What's another few months?" So I waited. I attended family dinners and pretended not to notice when Victoria exchanged glances with Derek. I accepted her condescending concern and her thinly veiled insults. I played the role of the doddering old woman she wanted me to be. And all the while, I was preparing. I documented every cruelty, every manipulation, every lie. I built relationships with my grandchildren, Charlotte, who was 14, and William, who was 12, carefully, subtly, making sure they knew their grandmother loved them without ever saying a word against their mother. I strengthened my connections with people who mattered: board members, lawyers, judges, politicians, not for social climbing as Victoria believed, but for protection. When the time came, I would need allies in high places, and I chose my moment. Victoria's wedding was perfect. It was the culmination of everything she had worked for: the society marriage, the appearance of success, the stage from which she could deliver her final blow. What she didn't know was that it was also the culmination of everything I had worked for. I had spent 5 years preparing for that moment in the ballroom. The yellowed envelope in my purse, the trust documents ready to be revealed, the words I would speak, rehearsed until they flowed as naturally as breathing. Victoria thought she was destroying me with her public humiliation. Instead, she gave me the perfect opportunity to destroy her. To understand why I waited so long to fight back, you have to understand what the years before that December evening had done to me. Richard and I were married for 32 years. He died when Victoria was 27, leaving me a widow at 60 and finally free of the man who had made my life a carefully gilded prison. Our marriage had been arranged, in the way that marriages among Boston's old families often were. His family had the name, mine had the money. It seemed like a good match to everyone except me. I learned quickly that Richard didn't want a wife. He wanted an accessory, something beautiful and silent to hang on his arm at parties, to manage his household, to give him children who would carry on his family name. The children never came. We tried for 10 years, endured countless doctors and treatments and humiliations before the specialists finally told us that Richard was sterile. The problem wasn't me. It had never been me. But Richard refused to accept that. He told everyone, his family, my family, our friends, that I was the one who couldn't conceive, that I had failed in the most fundamental duty of a wife, that I had robbed him of his legacy. When I found Victoria on those church steps, I thought it was a miracle, a chance to have the child I had always wanted, to prove to Richard that I could be a good mother, to build the family I had dreamed of. I was so naive. Richard agreed to the adoption only after I promised him that no one would ever know. Victoria would be presented as our biological child, the heir to both our fortunes, the proof that the problem had indeed been with me, that I had simply needed time. But from the moment we brought Victoria home, Richard began his campaign. He was subtle at first. He would comfort her when she cried, pushing me away. He would tell her stories about how Mommy was too busy, too tired, too unwell to play with her. He would buy her extravagant gifts, and then tell her they were a secret, something special between them that Mommy wouldn't understand. By the time Victoria was 5, she would scream if I tried to hold her. By the time she was 10, she barely spoke to me except to ask for things. By the time she was 15, she had learned to weaponize her contempt, using it to wound me in ways that Richard never could. Richard had created a perfect tool, a daughter who adored him and despised me, a weapon he could use whenever I threatened to assert myself, to push back, to claim any space in my own life. Victoria needs stability, he would say when I suggested traveling, or taking a job, or pursuing any interest that wasn't centered on our home. Victoria would be devastated if you weren't here. The truth was that Victoria didn't care whether I was there or not. But Richard cared. Richard needed me where he could control me, where he could watch me, where he could ensure that I never became a threat to his carefully constructed world. The years blurred together. Charity boards became my escape, the only place where I was allowed to have opinions, make decisions, matter. Victoria went to prep school, then to college, then into a career in marketing that was funded entirely by my money, but credited entirely to her talent. Richard's health declined, slowly and then quickly, until one morning I woke up and he was gone. I thought his death would free me. I thought Victoria might finally see me as something other than the enemy her father had created. I was wrong. Without Richard to direct her cruelty, Victoria became creative. She spread rumors about my mental health. She borrowed jewelry and pretended I had lost it. She invited herself to live in my home and then rearranged everything, throwing away treasures and memories, claiming she was helping me organize. She brought Derek into my life, and together they accelerated the campaign. The gaslighting began gradually. Small things at first. Items moved from where I had left them, appointments I didn't remember making, conversations Victoria insisted we had had, though I had no memory of them. "Mother, we talked about this last week. Don't you remember?" she would say, her voice dripping with concern. "Maybe you should see Dr. Feldman. I'm worried about you." I started to doubt myself. That was the worst part. After 60 years of being told I was wrong, stupid, worthless, some part of me believed it. Some part of me thought maybe Victoria was right. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I did need to be managed. That was the bottom. The absolute lowest point of my life, sitting alone in my beautiful house, surrounded by the wealth and privilege that should have made me powerful, and feeling utterly, completely helpless. If I hadn't overheard that conversation in the study, I might have let them win. I might have signed whatever documents they put in front of me, believed whatever lies they told me, surrendered everything I had to the people who wanted to destroy me. But I did overhear that conversation, and something inside me, something that Richard had tried to kill but never quite succeeded, woke up. The gaslighting continued after I began my preparations. Victoria and Derek didn't know I was aware of their plans, so they proceeded as if everything was going according to schedule. I played along. When Victoria suggested I see Dr. Feldman, I agreed, but I also, privately, arranged to see Dr. Catherine Reeves, a geriatric psychiatrist at Massachusetts General with an impeccable reputation. Reeves conducted a thorough evaluation and pronounced me in perfect mental health, above average, actually, for a woman my age. I kept that report in my safe, next to the yellowed envelope and the trust documents. When Victoria found a letter I had supposedly written and forgotten about, I nodded and apologized for my confusion. Then I had Marcus analyze the handwriting and confirm that it was a forgery, created by a professional document specialist that Derek had hired. I kept that analysis in my safe, too. When Victoria invited Dr. Feldman to dinner so he could casually observe my behavior, I played the role of the confused old woman perfectly. I repeated questions I had already asked. I forgot the names of people I had known for years. I lost my train of thought mid-sentence. Feldman left that dinner convinced that I was declining rapidly. What he didn't know was that Marcus had recorded our entire conversation and photographed the file Feldman had brought, a file that already contained a draft psychiatric evaluation diagnosing me with early-stage dementia. I was building my arsenal, piece by piece, document by document, lie by lie. The wedding invitation came 6 months before the ceremony. Victoria called to tell me herself, her voice bright with false warmth. "Mother, I have wonderful news. Derek proposed." I said all the right things. "Congratulations." "How exciting." "When is the wedding?" "October, at the Ritz-Carlton. It's going to be spectacular." She paused. "Of course, we'll need some help with the costs. Derek's family has had some financial setbacks, and I know you'd want to contribute to my special day." Contribute. As if I had a choice. "How much do you need?" $300,000 should cover everything. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the dress. She rattled off the list as if she were ordering items from a menu. "Oh, and Mother, I've already picked out your dress. Something tasteful and understated. You'll love it." I would not love it. It was cream-colored Chanel, elegant but deliberately matronly, designed to make me look as old and irrelevant as possible while Victoria dazzled in her Vera Wang. But I said yes to everything. Yes to the $300,000. Yes to the dress. Yes to being seated at the head table like a prop, visible but silent. I said yes because I knew that the wedding would be my moment. For 30 years I had endured. For 5 years I had prepared. Now finally, I was ready. Victoria wanted a public spectacle? I would give her one. She wanted to humiliate me in front of Boston society? I would be there, watching, waiting. She wanted to declare that I was nothing to her? I would grant her wish. The morning after the wedding, my phone rang at 6 a.m. I was already awake. I had slept better than I had in years, a deep, dreamless sleep, the sleep of someone who has finally set down a burden they have been carrying for decades. The caller ID showed Victoria's number. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Mother," her voice was ragged, stripped of its usual polish. "We need to talk." "I don't think we do. You can't do this. That trust, it's not legal. Derek's lawyer says there are grounds to contest it. Mental incapacity, undue influence. Derek's lawyer is a family court attorney in Connecticut who handles custody disputes and property settlements. He has no expertise in trust law, and he has no standing to contest a trust established in Massachusetts by a settler who has been declared mentally competent by 3 independent psychiatrists." Silence on the other end of the line. Victoria hadn't expected me to know about Derek's lawyer. She hadn't expected me to be prepared. "How did you—" "I've known about your plans for 5 years, Victoria. I've documented everything. The meetings with Dr. Feldman, the forged letters, the payments to the document specialist, the psychiatric evaluation that was written before it was ever conducted." I paused. "Would you like me to continue?" More silence. I could hear Victoria breathing, shallow and fast. "I'll sue you," she finally said. I'll take you to court. You'll do nothing. Because if you try to contest the trust, I will release everything I have to the press. The recordings, the documents, the evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. My voice was calm, almost gentle. Boston society will forgive many things, Victoria. They will not forgive being made fools of. And they will certainly not forgive the woman who tried to steal her own mother's fortune. You're bluffing. I never bluff. Ask Harrison Sullivan. Ask Marcus Webb. Ask any of the people who have been helping me prepare for this moment for the last 5 years. Victoria made a sound that might have been a sob or might have been a scream of rage. I couldn't tell, and I found that I didn't care. Why? She demanded. Why would you do this to me? I'm your daughter. You're not my daughter. You made that very clear last night, in front of 300 witnesses. I closed my eyes, and for just a moment, I let myself remember. The tiny baby in the cardboard box, the overwhelming love I had felt, the years of trying, failing, trying again to reach her. I loved you, Victoria. I loved you from the moment I found you on those church steps, but you never loved me back, and I finally accepted that some people are simply incapable of love. I didn't mean, you meant every word. You've been saying those words in one form or another, since you were old enough to speak. Last night you just finally said them out loud. I stood up and walked to the window of my bedroom, looking out at the Boston skyline glittering in the early morning light. The truth is that I should have done this years ago. I should have cut you off the moment I realized what you were planning. But I kept hoping, foolishly, pathetically, that somewhere inside, you was the little girl I had rescued from that church doorstep. I can change. Give me another chance. Please, Mother, No. The word hung in the air between us, final and absolute. No more chances, no more hoping, no more pretending that you will ever be the daughter I wanted. I turned away from the window. Charlotte and William will receive their inheritance when they turn 25. Until then, the trust will provide for their education and well-being. You will not have access to any of it. You can't take my children's money. It was never your money. It was always mine, and now it belongs to your children, who will hopefully grow up to be better people than you are. Victoria was crying now, real tears, though whether from grief or fury I couldn't tell. What am I supposed to do? She wailed. Derek is furious. He says the wedding was a waste. He says, I don't care what Derek says. You chose him. You live with the consequences. But I have nothing. You've taken everything. I've taken nothing that was ever yours. You have your job, your apartment, your car. You have everything you earned yourself. I paused. It's not much, is it? When you strip away everything you stole or manipulated out of other people. Victoria hung up. I stood there for a long moment, phone in hand, waiting to feel something. Regret, maybe. Guilt. The motherly instinct to call back, to apologize, to find some way to fix what was broken between us. But I felt nothing except relief. The next few weeks were chaos. Victoria and Derek tried everything. They hired lawyers who sent threatening letters. They contacted the press with their version of events. The cruel mother who had publicly humiliated her daughter on her wedding day. The heartless woman who had stolen her child's inheritance. But Harrison had prepared for this too. Every threatening letter was answered with documentation of Victoria's conspiracy. Every media inquiry was met with a carefully worded statement and an offer to provide evidence if needed. The story that emerged was not the one Victoria had planned. Society matron exposes daughter's fraud scheme at wedding, the headlines read. Boston heiress caught plotting to steal elderly mother's fortune. Marcus had released selected recordings to journalists he trusted. The recordings of Victoria and Derek planning to have me declared incompetent. The recording of Dr. Feldman agreeing to falsify a psychiatric evaluation. The recording of Victoria laughing about how easy it was to manipulate me. Public opinion turned against Victoria overnight. Her employer, a marketing firm that depended on its reputation, quietly let her go. Her friends, the society women she had cultivated so carefully, stopped returning her calls. Her new husband, faced with the reality that there would be no fortune, no inheritance, no rescue from his mounting debts, began looking for the exit. I watched it all from a distance, feeling something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not enough pity to change my mind. Not enough to reach out, to offer help, to pretend that the last 30 years hadn't happened, but enough to recognize that Victoria was, in her own way, as much a victim as I had been. Richard had created her. He had taken a blank slate, an abandoned baby who might have become anyone, and he had shaped her into a weapon. He had taught her to hate me, to manipulate me, to see me as nothing but an obstacle to be overcome. Victoria had never had a chance to become someone good, and now, at 40, she never would. I thought about this as I sat in Harrison's office, signing the final documents that would ensure my estate was distributed exactly as I intended. Having second thoughts? Harrison asked, watching me. Just perspective. I signed the last page and set down the pen. She's going to suffer. Derek is already talking to divorce lawyers. Her career is over. Her reputation is destroyed. She brought it on herself. I know. But she didn't choose to be the person she became. Richard made her. Harrison was quiet for a moment. You could include a provision, a small inheritance, conditional on therapy, on demonstrating genuine change. No. I shook my head. I spent 30 years hoping she would change. Hoping that if I loved her enough, forgave her enough, sacrificed enough, she would finally become the daughter I wanted. That hope nearly destroyed me. I stood up, gathering my purse. Some people can't be saved, Harrison. Some people don't want to be saved. The best I can do is protect her children from becoming like her. Harrison nodded slowly. You're a stronger woman than anyone gives you credit for, Eleanor. I know. I smiled, and it felt strange on my face. Genuine, unforced, free. I always was. I just finally started believing it. 6 months after the wedding, Victoria asked to meet me. I almost said no. The past 6 months had been the most peaceful of my life. I had traveled. Paris, Florence, Tokyo, places I had always wanted to see, but Richard had never permitted. I had reconnected with old friends, joined new boards, started writing a memoir that would probably never be published but was deeply satisfying to create. I had also spent time with Charlotte and William. Their parents' divorce had been brutal, and they were confused and hurting. I didn't speak against their mother. I never would. But I made sure they knew they were loved, that they were safe, that their futures were secure. The message came through Harrison's office. Victoria wanted to meet, privately, to talk. No lawyers, no witnesses, just mother and daughter. Against Harrison's advice, I agreed. We met at a neutral location, a private dining room at the Four Seasons, arranged by Harrison's assistant. When I arrived, Victoria was already there, sitting at the table with a glass of water she hadn't touched. She looked different, thinner, older. The expensive highlights were gone from her hair, the designer clothes replaced by something off the rack. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Mother. She stood as I approached. Thank you for coming. I sat down across from her, signaling to the waiter that we didn't need anything yet. What do you want, Victoria? To apologize. I waited. Victoria took a deep breath. Her hands were trembling slightly as she clasped them on the table. What I said at the wedding, what I've said for years, I was wrong. I was cruel. She paused, searching for words. I was everything Daddy taught me to be, and I never stopped to question whether that was right. And now you have? I've had 6 months with nothing but time to think. She looked down at her hands. Derek left. Took most of our joint accounts before I could stop him. The lawyers say I might be able to recover some of it, but it will take years. I'm sorry. Are you? I considered the question. I'm sorry you're suffering. I'm not sorry I protected myself. Victoria nodded slowly. That's fair. More than fair. She looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something in her eyes that might have been genuine. I've started therapy, real therapy, not the kind Daddy's friends provided. My therapist says, she says I have a lot of work to do. Understanding why I became who I am. Understanding what I did to you. That sounds healthy. It's hard. Really hard. Some days I can barely get out of bed. Victoria's voice cracked. I think about what I almost did, having you committed, stealing everything you built, and I feel sick. I feel like a monster. I didn't disagree. I didn't agree either. I just listened. I know you'll never forgive me, Victoria continued. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what Daddy did to you and what I did to you, and how miraculous it is that you survived us both. We sat in silence for a long moment. The waiter appeared at the edge of the room, saw our faces, and quietly withdrew. When I found you on those church steps, I finally said, you were 3 days old. You weighed 5 pounds. You were so small I could hold you in one hand. I paused, remembering. The note your birth mother left said I can't keep her. Just those 4 words. No explanation, no name, no way to contact her. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I fell in love with you instantly. It wasn't a choice. It was a force of nature. I would have done anything for you. I would have died for you. I shook my head. I nearly did die for you. The years with your father, the isolation, the constant cruelty. I stayed because of you. Because I thought you needed me. I did need you, Victoria whispered. I just didn't know it. You needed a mother. But Richard made sure I could never be that to you. He stole you from me the day I brought you home, and I spent 30 years trying to get you back. I reached across the table and for the first time in decades, took my daughter's hand. I loved you, Victoria. Part of me still does. But love isn't enough. It was never enough. What would be enough? I considered the question. Time, change, proof that you've become someone different than the person who tried to destroy me. I squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. I'm 68 years old. I don't know how much time I have left. I've chosen to spend it in peace, not in hope. So there's nothing I can do. You can be a better mother to Charlotte and William than I was allowed to be to you. You can break the cycle Richard started. You can become someone worthy of the second chance you're asking for. I stood up. That's not nothing, Victoria. That's everything. Victoria stood too, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Mother. I'm so sorry. I know. I picked up my purse. Maybe someday that will be enough, but not today. I walked out of the Four Seasons, leaving my daughter crying in the private dining room. I expected to feel triumphant. I had waited 30 years for Victoria to apologize, to acknowledge what she had done, to show even the smallest sign of genuine remorse. Instead, I felt tired. But also, beneath all of that, I felt something new. Hope. Not hope that Victoria would change. That was too much to ask. But hope that Charlotte and William would grow up differently. Hope that the poison Richard had introduced into our family would finally stop spreading. Hope that something good could still emerge from all the pain. I went home and called my grandchildren. Charlotte was 15 now, finishing her sophomore year at boarding school. William was 13. Struggling with his parents' divorce but resilient in the way children often are. Grandma! Charlotte's voice was bright with surprise. I wasn't expecting to hear from you today. I just wanted to tell you that I love you. Both of you. We love you too, Grandma. Are you okay? You sound weird. I laughed. I'm fine. Better than fine. I just saw your mother. Oh. Charlotte's voice cooled slightly. How was that? Hard. But maybe necessary. Is she still crazy? Charlotte. I made my voice firm. Your mother has made mistakes. Serious mistakes. But she's still your mother, and you should treat her with respect. She doesn't treat you with respect. That's between her and me. It's not your battle to fight. I paused. She's trying to change, Charlotte. I don't know if she'll succeed, but she's trying. That has to count for something. Silence on the line. Then, you're a better person than I am, Grandma. I'm just older. I've had more time to learn that hatred eats the person who carries it. I smiled into the phone. Forgiveness isn't about the other person, sweetheart. It's about setting yourself free. Did you forgive her? I thought about the question. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm leaving the door open. That's more than I could have done 6 months ago. I guess that's progress. Yes. I said. I guess it is. 2 years passed. I traveled the world. I wrote my memoir and, to my surprise, found a publisher who thought other women might want to read it. I served on boards and mentored young women and built a life that was entirely, completely my own. Victoria and I didn't speak often. A phone call on holidays, a brief email on birthdays. She was working again, a smaller firm, a humbler position, but honest work that she had earned herself. Her therapist said she was making progress. I chose to believe it. Charlotte graduated from high school with honors and was accepted to Yale. William was thriving at his school, discovering a talent for mathematics that his grandfather would have dismissed as unseemly for a boy of his class. I attended their games and performances, their graduations and awards ceremonies, always sitting quietly in the back, never making a scene. I learned to garden. I adopted a cat. I made friends with my neighbors for the first time in 40 years. And then, on a spring morning just after my 70th birthday, I received a letter. It was from Victoria, handwritten on plain stationery, without the elaborate monogram she had once insisted upon. Dear Mother, I've written this letter 100 times and torn it up 100 times. Nothing I say feels adequate. Nothing I write captures what I want you to understand. But here is what I know. You saved my life, not just on those church steps, but every day after. Every meal you cooked, every tuition check you wrote, every cruelty you endured so that I could have a childhood. You gave me life, again and again, and I repaid you with hatred. I don't understand why you loved me. I don't understand how you kept loving me after everything I did, but I'm starting to understand what that love cost you, and I'm starting to feel the weight of a debt I can never repay. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. You were right. That's not something I can ask for. It's something I have to earn, over years, maybe over a lifetime. I'm writing to tell you that I see you now, not as the enemy Daddy created, not as the obstacle to my inheritance, not as the weak and pathetic woman I convinced myself you were. I see Eleanor Marsh, a woman who survived an abusive marriage and raised a child who rejected her, a woman who protected herself when no one else would, a woman who found the strength to be free. I want to be that woman. I want to have even a fraction of your courage, your resilience, your capacity for love in the face of hatred. I don't know if we'll ever have a relationship. I don't know if you'll ever want me in your life again, but I wanted you to know that your daughter, your adopted, ungrateful, cruel daughter, finally understands what you gave her. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it. With love, I'm only beginning to learn how to feel, Victoria. I read the letter 3 times. Then I sat by the window with my cat in my lap, and I watched the spring rain fall on the garden I had planted. I thought about forgiveness, about what it means, about what it costs, about whether it's even possible after everything that's happened. I didn't have an answer. Maybe I never would. But for the first time in 30 years, the thought of my daughter didn't bring me pain. It brought something softer, more complex, a mixture of sorrow and hope, and something that might, someday, become peace. I went to my desk and pulled out a sheet of my own stationery, not the formal letterhead I used for business, but the simple cream paper I had started using for personal correspondence. Dear Victoria, thank you for your letter. I don't know what comes next for us. The damage between us is deep, and I'm too old to pretend it can be easily repaired. But I want you to know that I received your words. I understand what they cost you to write, and I believe, or at least I want to believe, that they're genuine. The door between us has been closed for a long time. I'm not ready to open it, but perhaps for now we can leave it unlocked. I'm proud of the work you're doing. Not the job, though that's admirable too, but the work on yourself. The woman who wrote this letter is not the woman who stood up at her wedding and tried to destroy me. That's not nothing. That's everything. Take care of yourself, Victoria. Be a good mother to Charlotte and William. Build a life that's worth living. Maybe someday we'll build something together. Maybe not. But either way, know that I'm cheering for you, quietly, from a distance, the way I've always cheered for you, even when you couldn't see it, with something that might be love and something that might become forgiveness. Your mother. I sealed the letter and left it on the hall table to be mailed in the morning. Then I made myself a cup of tea, sat in my favorite chair, and looked out at the garden I had planted, the roses and hydrangeas, the herbs and vegetables. The life I had created from nothing after 68 years of being told I could create nothing at all. I thought about the yellowed envelope in my safe, the document that had started everything, the birth certificate that said unknown, where a mother's name should be. Victoria's birth mother had abandoned her. Richard had corrupted her. I had loved her and failed her and finally, painfully, set her free. But maybe, just maybe, some part of the love I had given her had taken root. Maybe the daughter I had found on those church steps was finally becoming someone worth finding. I didn't know if Victoria and I would ever have a real relationship. I didn't know if I could ever truly forgive her, or if she could ever truly change. But I knew one thing for certain. I was 70 years old. I was wealthy, healthy, and finally at peace. I had grandchildren who loved me, friends who valued me, a life that was entirely my own, and I had done something that Richard, with all his cruelty, had never managed to do. I had survived. The afternoon light was golden through the windows. The cat purred in my lap. The tea was exactly the right temperature, hot enough to warm me, cool enough to drink. I smiled, and I let myself rest. For the first time in 30 years, I had nothing left to prove and no one left to fight. I was free.